Hi, I'm Eric Darnell. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Baobab Studios, and we're a VR company that's focused on interactive storytelling.
What attracted you to virtual reality as a new medium of storytelling?
The first thing that attracted me was putting a headset on. I had no expectation, and it just kind of blew me away. And even in the relatively primitive form of VR that I saw about 2.5 years ago, the potential was just so obvious. And the idea of immersing yourself in this world instead of staring at a rectangle into a world that you can never be a part of just was really compelling.
How have you found your background in creating computer animated feature films in Hollywood help with the virtual reality side of the business?
Well, you know, the premise that I have and that we have at Baobab is that great storytelling is great storytelling. You can read a Shakespeare play, you can hear it on the radio, you can watch it on stage, you can see a movie, you can see it as an animated movie a la Lion King. And it can all be good. It's all about using the medium to its unique and special advantage to tell the story the best way you can for that medium.
There have been, and I've made video games based on a lot of the movies you've made, but we've had the video game industry over the last 40 years evolving. Film has been evolving for the last 125 years. How do you see virtual reality tapping into both of those art forms?
Well, one of the things that we kind of look at as sort of a paradigm for thinking about the stories that we're doing is this kind of thought experiment of like coming across a little girl crying on a park bench. Maybe it's early morning, nobody's around, she's too young to be by herself. What do? If it's a game, you interact with her, but probably for selfish reasons. And I don't mean to sound negative, I just mean, you're gonna get some information that's gonna help you get to the next level, or if you rescue her, you might get some reward, or you'll figure out how to solve a puzzle, or defeat an enemy. And so it's really kind of about your own goal-driven, it's a game after all, right? If it's a film, there's no expectation to interact. You just sit in a chair and you watch this story of this girl unfold. You care about her, you hope she's going to be okay, but there's nothing you can do about it, right? You just sit there. And then in real life, I think almost anybody would engage with that girl and try to help her in some way, find her parents or figure out something that you could do to make sure that she's going to be safe. And so, because of this ability in VR to really connect with characters, especially if you're doing real-time, on-the-fly rendering like we're doing with the kind of computer animation we're doing, you can have this agency that you're used to having in games, and you can have the sort of potential for great empathy like you have in films. You can have the bigger-than-life stories of both films and games, and then you can have the immersion and perhaps most importantly, the motivation to interact that you would have in real life. And if you can imagine 3 circles and they're all intersecting, right there in the middle, potentially, we think is VR. And so it's not really an extension of cinema or film. It is truly its own medium that can tap into all different kinds of things and experiences in our lives.
How have you approached creating the characters that we see in Invasion and in the upcoming Asteroids?
Well, the thing that we're really focused on is having stories and characters that feel like they really matter. And in order to do that, we need to have characters that allow us to perform, to act, so that the audience really understands what's going on in that character's head. We need to have characters that can say one thing and mean another, that are deep down wanting something different that they would never articulate, but you can see it in their performance. And in order to do that, we need to have the hooks that an animator uses to really draw that performance out of a character. And when you're rendering stuff in real time, 90 frames a second, you've got 11 milliseconds to render both images. And so the technology that allows us to create those kinds of high definition characters that have that subtlety and nuance is is pretty significant. And so we have a lot of in-house proprietary tools. Now it sounds like tech, and it is, and it's really important, but ultimately it's all about the art of having great characters that audiences can really feel like are living, breathing things, and that you can really feel connected to.
When it comes to traditional CGI features, sound is something that a lot of people don't even think about, but can you talk a little about the importance of audio in VR, especially from a directional standpoint?
Well, yes, audio is really important, and when you have this capability to have 360-degree sound all around you coming from any direction, it makes the world seem that much more real. It's what we're used to when we're walking down the street, you know? And then it also is the sort of thing like the viewer is deciding what to look at. You know, there's not a director cutting from one shot to another. So if I'm in the real world and I'm walking down the street and I hear the sound of metal against metal, I'm gonna turn, you know, and see like that car wreck or whatever it is. And so we can use sound like that in VR to really pull the viewer's attention somewhere. And it's funny because it also means that, like, if you're going to have a chirping bird, which you can do in a movie and just have it be off screen and it's just part of the ambience, but if it's in VR and there's a chirping bird and you can hear it in your right ear and you look over there, there better be a bird, right? So everything that we can do with audio is all about making it feel more real, more immersive, also helping direct the viewer's eye and guiding them to perhaps what's important.
What's it been like exploring comedy in that 360 environment?
Well, you know, I think that comedy works fine in VR. I think that the differences really are about the viewer's attention. Where is the viewer's attention? And so timing is so critical with a joke. And if the viewer's late to the game, you know, if they haven't turned their head around yet, then, or if they're bored because nothing funny's happening and they're expecting it and they decide to look somewhere else, then you've lost them. So timing becomes even more critical because the viewer is choosing what to compose and what to look at. So I see my job as a director on one level is to inspire the viewer to look with their complete free choice at exactly what I want them to look at when I want them to look there.
Traditionally, in sticking with the time, you normally have about 90 minutes on a big screen to tell a story. What are you finding in terms of the sweet spot within VR, especially considering once you're in the headset, time kind of stops and has a different, it's not the same as real world.
You know, sometimes people ask, you know, when do you think you're going to have a full-length VR piece? But I don't know what a full-length VR piece is. It's not necessarily 90 minutes. It may be. It may be ideal time could be 10 minutes, or maybe it doesn't even matter. Maybe it's more about having a great story and fitting it to whatever time is best for that story. You know, a lot of the durations for things in movies, and even more particularly in television, have to do with other factors like what's our budget, you know, how long do we have until there's a commercial break, that kind of thing. And so VR kind of exists right now in its own world. At Baobab, we tend to look at doing content that is less than 30 minutes in general in everything that we're developing, and often less than 10 minutes. And part of the reason is if a story works in 10 minutes, it works in 10 minutes and you're okay. But also what that allows us to do is iterate quickly. Have an idea, see how we can innovate with our storytelling in VR, execute on that. It's an experiment because we don't know what we're doing. Well, we know as much as anybody, I guess, is another way to put it. And then we can take what we learn and apply it to the next thing. So frankly, we don't want to commit to a 90-minute or 2-hour piece right now, because the time it would take us to create that piece of content, by the time it came out, who knows where VR is going to be, because it's changing. You know, you can't even predict where it's going to be in a year, much, you know, 6 months sometimes. It's changing so quickly. And
episodic is something, like you mentioned, television's been doing it forever, but we've seen a lot of episodic success on the video game front as well, so that seems like it sits well within this new format.
It definitely has a lot of potential, and if we can create stories and characters that people really, really love and they want to come back to, then, you know, we'll look for opportunities to give that to the audience.
I know coming from traditional animation, did you have a sense when you first were creating these characters for VR that someone would turn around and license it for the big screen as well?
No, in fact, Invasion, to me, when I started, was more a story about these aliens, because I had just seen the original War of the Worlds, and I was thinking about these aliens and how, despite all their technology and their firepower, they were really just big buffoons, who forgot to account for microbiology. I thought, so I'm going to tell the story about these two aliens that come to Earth, and they don't account for like the little babes in the woods that ended up leading to their defeat. But this pointed to my inexperience with VR, because once we actually had that cute little white bunny hop out on the ice and look at the viewer in the eye and playfully dance around, people were smitten. They do things they never do in a movie. They reach out, they try to touch her, they mirror her like playful antics, and people were loving that bunny. And then we stumbled into this thing where the bunny like hopped behind the viewer for protection from the aliens and their blasters. And a lot of people, without being prompted, took their headset off and said how remarkable that moment was for them, because they really felt like they were there. They really felt like the bunny needed them for protection. They were struggling in their minds to try to find out something, what can I do to make sure this bunny doesn't get disintegrated? And so the bunny became the star. And now we understand all the reasons, and so much of it has to do with the cuteness of the bunny, but most of it I think really has to do with the power of VR to put you in that world and to have a character recognize that you exist in her world and react to that it has meaning for her. And of course, because we're doing this in real time, wherever the viewer moves, the bunny will find that viewer and maintain eye contact and keep that connection going. So you just can't do that in film. I never believe an actor when they look at the camera is looking at me. But out on that ice, when the snow's falling all around me and the clouds are rolling by overhead, it's hard not to believe that bunny knows you're there and cares about you.
How do you feel you're pushing interactivity with asteroids based on what you learned with Invasion?
Well, with Invasion, there were no hand controllers available. So that really gave us an opportunity to take a much bigger step into making the viewer become a part of the story. So Asteroids allows the viewer to be this little robot helper on the ship. You've got these two arms and these little robot hands, and there's times when you can help the aliens, or at least try to help the aliens. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, they're never satisfied. But for us, it was just our next experiment or our next step in trying to find this balance between having a tight story and telling it really well, but letting the viewer be a part of it, giving the viewer the option to engage themselves in the story and see it to its conclusion. And so if we've done our job right, the viewer does connect with these characters on this spaceship. They do think that things matter. They do feel motivated by their own empathy to step up and do something to help these characters when they need it. And for a lot of people, it's a very interesting and very different experience than a movie, because you really feel like you're there and you really feel like you have a role.
What excites you about the future of VR?
Just about everything. I think there's so much to learn. We don't even know what tools we have in our toolbox yet. There's a marketplace that's just starting to grow. There's headsets that are coming out now that are more powerful and less expensive. There are content creators who are figuring out this new medium and trying to create the best content that they can. And I think for the industry to really take off, it's going to have to be this sort of, this binary star system of headsets and content kind of like playing off one another and sort of helping each other rise. Because you don't want to buy a headset until there's a lot of good content out there, and you don't want to fund good content if nobody has a headset. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. And we're fairly conservative about the near-term future, and so we're we're very trying to be very fiscally responsible and not burn through our funding and be around for when the VR marketplace really hits it big. And it could be a number of years. We don't know, but we're going to be in it for as long as we can. And in the meantime, just trying to create the best content we can.
What role have you seen video games play in this space, especially getting people hooked or getting them interested in VR to begin with?
Well, virtual reality and games are a great match. It really puts you in that world. And at Baobab, we have a small team of a little more than 20 people, but they're all really experienced people from both the game world and the film world. And so it's really kind of become this meeting of the minds, because it's one thing to be in a world where you can have this high fidelity and take days to render a single frame, and it's another thing when you've got to render 2 frames every 11 milliseconds. And so it seems like these two camps should be like just about as far apart as you can imagine. But they're both really interested in creating great storytelling content in VR, and so they're finding ways to come together and to collaborate and to create something that takes advantage of both worlds.